The charity gala in Manhattan's prestigious Waldorf Astoria ballroom buzzed with the quiet murmurs of America's elite. Diamond necklaces caught the light of crystal chandeliers, while waiters in crisp white gloves weaved through the crowd with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. In the corner of the grand ballroom, a gleaming black Steinway grand piano stood waiting, its polished surface reflecting the soft amber lights above. Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises and one of New York's most formidable business titans, surveyed the room with disinterest from his corner table. At 53, his once jet-black hair had been invaded by distinguished silver at the temples, but his piercing blue eyes retained the razor-sharp focus that had helped him build his technology empire from nothing. Worth an estimated $7 billion, Alexander was known as the Wolf of Wall Street, not for any ethical lapses, but for his predatory business instincts and unwavering determination. Tonight, however, Alexander was merely fulfilling an obligation. The Children's Musical Advancement Foundation was one of the few charities he supported, though few knew why. His assistant had prepared the customary check, $1 million, the same as every year, which would be handed over with minimal fanfare before his departure. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event hostess announced from the small stage, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter. "As part of tonight's fundraiser, we have a special performance from one of our scholarship recipients." Alexander checked his watch. 20 minutes, and he could make a discreet exit. "Please welcome 10-year-old Emma Lawrence, who will perform an original piano composition." A small girl with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail walked onto the stage. Her modest blue dress was a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. She approached the piano with quiet confidence, adjusted the bench, and sat with perfect posture. The room fell silent as her small fingers hovered above the keys. The first notes floated through the air, delicate, hesitant, like raindrops on a window pane. Alexander's hand froze midway to his glass of scotch. The melody unfurled like a forgotten memory, simple, yet hauntingly familiar. As the composition developed, weaving minor chords that spoke of loss with glimpses of major key hope, Alexander felt a tightness in his chest he hadn't experienced in decades. The girl's small fingers moved with increasing confidence, building the piece toward an emotional crescendo that seemed impossible from someone so young. It was as if she had lived several lifetimes of joy and heartbreak, distilling those experiences into music that transcended her years. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. The room disappeared around him as the melody transported him 25 years into the past, to a small apartment in Brooklyn, to a battered upright piano, to hands guiding his own across yellowed keys, to a voice whispering, "This is our song, Alex, just for us." His vision blurred. Something wet rolled down his cheek, a tear. Alexander Blackwood, the man newspapers called Wall Street's Iceman, was crying in public. With trembling hands, he reached for his handkerchief, quickly dabbing at his eyes before anyone could notice. But it was too late. His business associate James Chen had seen it all, his expression a mixture of concern and astonishment. Alexander stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair, and headed for the nearest exit as the final notes of the composition hung in the air. "My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already sparked your curiosity, leave a like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey where the power of music bridges worlds that time and circumstance have torn apart." Which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below. Alexander's driver noticed something was wrong the moment his employer slid into the back seat of the Bentley. "Home, sir?" asked Robert, who had been Alexander's driver for 15 years and knew better than to comment on his boss's unusual demeanor. "No," Alexander replied, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "Just drive anywhere." As the luxury sedan pulled away from the curb, Alexander loosened his bow tie with shaking fingers. He hadn't heard that melody in 25 years. It was impossible that a 10-year-old girl could know it. A composition that had never been published, never recorded, never shared beyond the walls of that tiny Brooklyn apartment. While the car glided through Manhattan's glittering nightscape, Alexander's mind drifted back to 1999. He had been a struggling entrepreneur then, just 28 years old, working 18-hour days trying to keep his fledgling software company afloat. His only respite came in the evenings, when he would return to their small apartment to find Claire at the piano. Claire Lawrence, the love of his life, a gifted pianist who worked as a music teacher to support them while Alexander chased his dreams. Every night, she would compose and play, creating melodies that seemed to wash away the day's stress. And their song, the one the little girl had just played, had been Claire's gift to him on the night he'd secured his first major investor. "A melody just for us," she had said, "for the beginning of our future together." 3 months later, she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just a brief note saying she couldn't live that life anymore. Alexander had thrown himself into his work, channeling his heartbreak into building Blackwood Enterprises. He never played the piano again, never listened to classical music, never allowed himself to think of Claire or their song, until tonight. Lawrence, he whispered to himself. The girl's surname was Lawrence. It had to be a coincidence. Claire hadn't been pregnant when she left. He would have known, wouldn't he? Alexander pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "Peterson, I need you to find everything you can on an Emma Lawrence. 10 years old, piano prodigy, scholarship recipient with the Children's Musical Advancement Foundation." He paused. "And find Claire Lawrence, last known whereabouts, Brooklyn, 1999. "Tonight, sir?" Peterson asked, though he already knew the answer. "Immediately." Alexander ended the call and stared out the window at the passing city lights, each one blurring like the years that had slipped away from him. If there was even the slightest possibility that Emma was connected to Claire or to him, he had to know. "Take me to the office," he instructed Robert. There would be no sleep tonight, not with the past suddenly pounding at his door, demanding to be acknowledged. As the Bentley changed direction toward Blackwood Tower, Alexander's mind raced through calculations. A child of 10 years would have been born in 2014. Claire had left him in late 1999. The timeline didn't match, yet that melody, their melody, couldn't be explained away so easily. By the time he reached his office on the top floor of Blackwood Tower, Peterson had already emailed a preliminary report. Alexander's hands shook slightly as he opened the file on his computer. Emma Lawrence, born September 12, 2014, in Boston, Massachusetts. Mother, Claire Lawrence, piano teacher and part-time composer. Father, not listed on the birth certificate. Alexander stared at the screen, the blood rushing in his ears. Claire had a daughter who played their song, a song no one else could possibly know. The implications were staggering, yet made no logical sense. Claire had left him 15 years before Emma was born, unless... Alexander scrolled further through the report, scanning for details on Claire's life in the intervening years. There were gaps, significant ones, but one detail caught his eye. Claire had undergone fertility treatments at Boston Reproductive Medicine in 2013. The type of treatment wasn't specified, but Alexander felt the ground shift beneath him as a wild, impossible theory formed in his mind. He searched his desk drawers until he found an old business card, faded but still legible. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, reproductive endocrinologist, James Chen's wife, the same James who had witnessed his emotional breakdown at the gala tonight. Something was connecting across 25 years of silence, and Alexander was determined to uncover what it was, no matter the cost to his carefully constructed life. Sleep eluded Alexander that night as he paced the expansive living room of his Central Park penthouse. Dawn found him standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city awaken below, while nursing his third cup of black coffee. His normally impeccable appearance had given way to rumpled shirt sleeves and disheveled hair, physical manifestations of his internal turmoil. At precisely 7 a.m., his phone rang. Peterson, ever efficient. "I have a current address for Claire Lawrence and her daughter in Boston, sir. They live in a modest apartment in Cambridge, near the university. Ms. Lawrence teaches piano at the New England Conservatory and gives private lessons. The daughter, Emma, attends a public school with a specialized arts program. They appear to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Alexander absorbed this information in silence before asking, and the fertility clinic. Boston Reproductive Medicine confirms Claire Lawrence was a patient in 2013-2014. Dr. Elizabeth Chen was indeed her physician. I couldn't access medical records, of course, but I did find something interesting. Peterson paused. The Children's Musical Advancement Foundation that sponsored Emma last night. Their primary benefactor for the past decade has been James Chen and his wife, Elizabeth. The pieces were starting to align, forming a picture Alexander wasn't sure he was ready to see. Book me on the next flight to Boston. Have the company apartment prepared. And Peterson, Alexander's voice hardened, schedule a meeting with James Chen for this morning. My office, 1 hour. James Chen arrived at Blackwood Tower looking nervous, his usual confident demeanor notably absent, as Alexander's assistant escorted him into the corner office. Alexander stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. You knew, Alexander stated without turning around. It wasn't a question. James sighed heavily, setting his briefcase down. Alex, 25 years of friendship, James. Alexander finally turned, his expression cold but controlled. You looked me in the eye every day for 25 years, knowing what Claire had done. It wasn't my secret to tell, James responded, meeting Alexander's gaze directly. Elizabeth is bound by doctor-patient confidentiality. She never even told me until recently when Emma won the scholarship. Alexander's fist came down hard on his desk. Oh, don't play games with me. You arranged for that girl to perform last night. You wanted me to hear that song. Yes, James didn't deny it. It was time you knew. Knew what, exactly? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. James lowered himself into a chair, suddenly looking older than his 54 years. When Claire left you in 1999, she was pregnant, Alex. She miscarried soon after. The loss, it broke something in her. She couldn't face you, couldn't face the life you were building together when the future she'd imagined had shattered. Alexander felt the room spin slightly. Claire had been pregnant. He'd never known. James continued. She moved to Boston, built a new life teaching music. But she never forgot you. When she decided to have a child years later, she couldn't. Well, she needed fertility treatments. Elizabeth became her doctor. And? Alexander prompted, his heart pounding against his ribs. And Claire had saved something from your time together, a sample of your DNA. She asked Elizabeth to use it. The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of his desk to steady himself. Are you telling me that Emma Lawrence is my biological daughter? James nodded slowly. Claire never intended for you to find out. But when Emma started composing music that Claire swears she never taught her, Elizabeth and I felt you had a right to know. That melody Emma played last night, Claire says she composed it independently at age 7, claimed she heard it in a dream. Alexander sank into his chair, memories flooding back of Claire's theories about music being something remembered rather than created. Genetic memory, he whispered. Elizabeth would explain it differently, James replied. But yes, something like that. Does the girl know about me? No. Claire told her she used an anonymous donor. Emma doesn't know anything about you. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Your flight to Boston departs in 2 hours, sir. James noticed the message and stood. What are you going to do, Alex? Alexander stared at his old friend, emotions warring behind his carefully composed expression. I don't know yet, but I'm going to Boston to find out. Alex, James said carefully, Claire had her reasons. Don't go in there like a corporate raider. This isn't a hostile takeover. This is a family that doesn't know you exist, a family that exists because of me, Alexander corrected sharply. A daughter who has been kept from me for 10 years. A daughter you never agreed to have, James countered. Claire's methods were unorthodox, I grant you, maybe even unethical. But Emma is an innocent child who believes her world is stable and makes sense. Whatever you do next will change her life forever. Just remember that. As James left the office, Alexander remained seated, staring at his reflection in the glossy surface of his desk. The man looking back at him was a stranger. Not the confident CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, but a man on the verge of discovering he might be a father to a musical prodigy with her mother's talent and somehow memories of a song she couldn't possibly know. The private jet touched down at Boston Logan International Airport under a slate gray sky that threatened rain. Alexander had spent the 2-hour flight reviewing everything Peterson had gathered on Claire and Emma Lawrence. School records showing Emma's exceptional musical abilities, newspaper clippings of local recitals where she had performed, and a handful of public social media photos showing a smiling girl with familiar blue eyes, his eyes, in his luxury company apartment overlooking Boston Harbor. Alexander changed into less intimidating attire. Dark jeans and a cashmere sweater instead of his usual bespoke suit. He wasn't sure what his plan was yet. Part of him wanted to storm into Claire's life, demanding answers, wielding legal threats, and the considerable power his wealth afforded him. But James's warning echoed in his mind, tempering his anger with caution. This wasn't a business acquisition. This was a child, potentially his child, whose world he was about to upend. Alexander instructed his driver to take him to Cambridge, to the address Peterson had provided. The modest brownstone apartment building stood in stark contrast to his Manhattan penthouse. He sat in the car for nearly an hour, watching the entrance, rehearsing what he might say if Claire appeared. Just as he was about to leave, they emerged. Claire, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, but still falling in the same soft waves he remembered. And beside her, Emma, carrying a music portfolio case almost as large as she was. They walked with identical gaits, heads slightly tilted toward each other in conversation. Alexander's breath caught. Even from this distance, the resemblance between mother and daughter was striking. But there, in the set of Emma's jaw and the determined squaring of her shoulders, he saw himself. He watched as they climbed into a well-maintained but aging Honda and drove away, presumably to one of Emma's lessons. Only when they had disappeared from view did Alexander release the breath he'd been holding. "Follow them," he instructed his driver, "but keep your distance." The Honda led them to the New England Conservatory, where Claire parked and escorted Emma inside. Alexander waited 15 minutes before following. In the grand lobby of the historic building, he inquired about Claire Lawrence and was directed to a practice room on the 3rd floor. As he approached the designated room, Alexander heard it again, that haunting melody that had reduced him to tears at the gala. But this time it was different. The composition was evolving, growing more complex as small fingers explored new harmonies and emotional depths. He stood outside the door, paralyzed by indecision. What right did he have to disrupt this child's life? What right did Claire have to create this child from his genetic material without his knowledge or consent? The ethical questions swirled in his mind, but beneath them all pulsed a simpler truth. He wanted to know his daughter. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by Claire's voice. "That's beautiful, Emma. The middle section especially. It's like you're having a conversation between hope and memory." "I don't know where it comes from," Emma replied, her voice small but clear. "It's like the music is already there, and I'm just finding it." "That's how the best music works," Claire responded warmly. "Now, let's work on your Chopin." Alexander retreated silently down the hallway, unwilling to confront them here in Emma's safe space. Instead, He returned to his apartment and made a phone call to his personal attorney in New York. I need to know my legal rights in a rather unusual paternity situation, he began, before explaining the circumstances as clinically as possible. His attorney's stunned silence spoke volumes about the complexity of the case. This is unprecedented territory, Alex, the attorney finally said. While you could potentially establish paternal rights through DNA testing, since your genetic material was used without consent, the courts would consider the best interests of the child first and foremost. Given that you had no knowledge of or relationship with the child for 10 years and never agreed to be a father, it's complicated. I'm not looking to disrupt her life legally, Alexander clarified. I just want to know where I stand before I approach Claire. After ending the call, Alexander stood at the window overlooking the harbor, watching boats navigate the choppy waters as rain began to fall. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, who controlled billions of dollars and thousands of employees, felt completely powerless in this situation. Stories like this remind us that regardless of wealth or status, we all face moments that change us forever. If you believe in the power of unexpected connections, consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next in this extraordinary journey. The following morning, Alexander stood outside the brownstone apartment building once more, this time with a clear purpose. He had watched Claire leave alone 20 minutes earlier, presumably after taking Emma to school. This was his opportunity to speak with Claire privately, without immediately disrupting Emma's life. He approached the intercom and pressed the button for apartment 3B. No response. He tried again, then a third time. Nothing. Just as he was about to leave, an elderly woman exited the building, holding the door open as she maneuvered her shopping cart through. "Are you looking for Claire?" she asked, eyeing him curiously. "She usually teaches until noon on Tuesdays." Alexander offered his most charming smile. "Yes, I'm an old friend from New York. I was hoping to surprise her." The woman smiled back. Such a lovely woman, and that daughter of hers, a true musical genius. Claire should be back around 12:30. With that, she continued on her way, leaving the door ajar. Alexander hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The ethical implications of entering without permission flitted through his mind, but were quickly dismissed. After all, wasn't this his right? To confront the woman who had used his genetic material without consent. The third-floor hallway was quiet, with faded floral wallpaper and the smell of someone's late breakfast lingering in the air. Outside apartment 3B, Alexander paused again, then tried the door. Locked, of course. But Alexander hadn't built a tech empire without learning a few unconventional skills along the way. Within minutes, using a credit card and techniques he hadn't employed since his struggling entrepreneur days, he let himself into Claire's apartment. The space was modest but warm, filled with books, plants, and most prominently, music. Sheet music covered the coffee table, musical notation posters decorated the walls, and in the corner stood an upright piano, not unlike the one from their Brooklyn apartment all those years ago. Alexander moved through the space like a ghost, taking in the evidence of a life he'd been excluded from. Photos of Emma lined the walls. Emma as a toddler at the piano, Emma receiving awards at recitals, Emma and Claire with their heads together, laughing. In each image, Alexander now recognized pieces of himself, the determined set of her jaw, the intense concentration in her eyes when she played. In the small home office, he found what he was looking for, a filing cabinet containing Emma's birth certificate, medical records, school information. And there, in a folder labeled simply Emma Origins, he discovered the truth. Legal documents from Boston Reproductive Medicine confirmed his suspicions. Claire had indeed preserved a sample of his DNA, a fact that sent a chill down his spine, and had used it years later to conceive Emma through IVF. There were consent forms with his forged signature, medical records detailing the procedure, and a handwritten journal where Claire had documented her thoughts throughout the process. With trembling hands, Alexander opened the journal to a random page. "I know what I've done is wrong legally, perhaps even morally, but in my heart, it feels right. Alex gave me the greatest love I've ever known, and now he's giving me the greatest gift, even if he doesn't know it. Our child will carry the best of him, his determination, his creativity, his fierce intelligence, and I will give her what he couldn't give me then: stability, presence, unconditional love. Someday perhaps she'll understand. Someday perhaps I'll find the courage to tell her about her father, the brilliant man who is half of who she is." Alexander closed the journal, his emotions a complex tangle of anger, betrayal, longing, and something else. A strange, unexpected pride at the evidence of Emma's accomplishments scattered throughout the apartment. His contemplation was interrupted by the sound of keys in the door. He quickly returned the documents to their folders, but made no move to hide his presence. It was time for this confrontation, 25 years overdue. Claire entered the apartment, arms filled with groceries, humming absently, the same melody Emma had played at the gala. When she saw Alexander standing in her living room, the bags dropped from her arms, oranges rolling across the hardwood floor. "Alex," she whispered, her face draining of color. Not a question, but a statement, as if she'd been expecting this day to come, dreading it for years. "Hello, Claire," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside him. "I believe we have a lot to discuss." Claire's hand clutched at the doorframe for support. "How did you find out?" "Find you? Get in here?" Alexander's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "The better question is why you thought I never would." Claire closed the door behind her, leaning against it as if preparing for an escape route. "I never thought you'd listen to Emma play. I never imagined you'd recognize the melody." "Our song," Alexander said quietly. "A song you never taught her, according to James Chen. A song she somehow composed independently. James had no right." "No right?" Alexander's voice rose slightly. "That's rich coming from you. Let's talk about rights, Claire. Like my right to know you were pregnant in 1999. My right to choose whether my genetic material would be used to create a child in 2014. My right to know my daughter for the past 10 years. Tears filled Claire's eyes, but Alexander found himself unmoved. The woman before him was both achingly familiar and a complete stranger, the love of his youth and the architect of his most profound betrayal. "She's thriving, Alex," Claire said softly. "She's happy. She's healthy and talented and kind. Isn't that what matters most?" "Don't you dare try to take the moral high ground," Alexander replied coldly. "You committed fraud. You violated my bodily autonomy. In any other context, what you did would be criminal." Claire sank onto the couch, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You're right, I was wrong. But I was also desperate and heartbroken and alone. After the miscarriage I never knew about," Alexander interjected. "I couldn't face you," Claire continued, tears now flowing freely. "You were so focused on building your company. When I lost the baby, I felt like I'd failed at the one thing that might have kept us connected. And later, when I decided I still wanted a child, your DNA was all I had left of what we'd planned together." Alexander stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman he'd once loved with this person who had made such a monumental decision without him. "I want to meet her," he stated finally, "properly as her father." Claire's face paled at Alexander's demand. "You can't just walk into her life and announce you're her father. It would devastate her." "And whose fault is that?" Alexander countered, pacing the small living room. "You've had 10 years to prepare her for this possibility." "I never thought it would become a possibility," Claire admitted, gathering the fallen oranges from the floor. Her hands trembled as she placed them in a bowl. Emma believes her biological father was an anonymous donor, a faceless, nameless contributor to her existence. Well, I have a face and a name, Alexander stated coldly. And apparently, I have a daughter. Claire sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you want, Alex? Money isn't an issue. We live modestly, but I make enough teaching. Are you planning to sue for custody? Punish me through Emma? The accusation stung, though Alexander had to admit to himself that vengeance had crossed his mind in the darkest moments of the night. I want to know her, he said finally. I've missed 10 years of her life. I don't want to miss any more. Claire studied him, searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or the man she'd once loved. And what happens when you get bored with playing daddy? When board meetings and business deals take priority again? Emma isn't a company you can acquire and then neglect when something more interesting comes along. That's unfair, Alexander snapped. You have no idea who I've become in 25 years. And you have no idea what it takes to raise a child, Claire countered. To be there every day, for the nightmares and stomach bugs and homework struggles, for the tiny victories and crushing disappointments. Being a father isn't about DNA, Alex. It's about showing up consistently, even when it's inconvenient. They stared at each other across the room, two people who had once shared everything, now separated by decades of choices and secrets. Let me ask you something, Alexander said finally. If Emma hadn't played our song at that gala, if I hadn't recognized it and started investigating, would you ever have told me about her? Claire's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, he said, disappointment seeping into his tone. You were going to let me die without ever knowing I had a daughter. Claire flinched at his words. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, Alex. No, just a decision you made unilaterally. Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. I'm staying at the Harborview Apartments for the next week. I'd like to meet Emma, properly, not as a stranger stalking her performances. You have until Friday to figure out how to introduce me to her in a way that causes minimal disruption to her life. After that, I'll be forced to take matters into my own hands. Is that a threat? Claire asked, rising to her feet. It's a boundary, Alexander replied, and a courtesy I'm extending despite the fact that you gave me none. Friday, Claire. I mean it. He left her apartment, closing the door firmly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall for a moment, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The girl whose music had moved him to tears was his daughter. A daughter created without his knowledge or consent, yet undeniably his. Alexander returned to his temporary apartment and made a series of phone calls. First to his executive assistant, extending his absence from New York indefinitely, then to his therapist, scheduling an emergency virtual session, finally to James Chen. I confronted Claire, he said without preamble when James answered. And? James asked cautiously. She admits everything. She had no intention of ever telling me about Emma. James sighed heavily. What now? Now I want your wife's professional opinion, Alexander stated. As someone who specializes in reproductive medicine and ethics, what Claire did, preserving my genetic material without consent, using it years later, forging documents, is it as egregious as I think it is? Why don't you ask her yourself? James suggested. She's been carrying this secret for nearly as long as Claire has. An hour later, Dr. Elizabeth Chen sat across from Alexander in his apartment, her expression carefully neutral. What Claire did was unethical and illegal, Elizabeth confirmed, but it was also born of profound grief and longing. When she came to me in 2013, she'd been in therapy for years, dealing with the trauma of the miscarriage and your breakup. She believed, rightly or wrongly, that having your child was a way of healing that wound. That doesn't justify theft and fraud, Alexander pointed out. No, it doesn't, Elizabeth agreed, but understanding her motivations might help you navigate what comes next, especially where Emma is concerned. Alexander moved to the window, gazing out at the harbor. Claire thinks I'll be a terrible father, that I'll abandon Emma when being a parent becomes inconvenient. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Will you? I don't know, Alexander admitted honestly. I've never been a father. I've spent 25 years building a company, not a family, but I want the chance to try. Then that's what you need to communicate to Claire, Elizabeth advised. Not threats or legal maneuvers, but your genuine desire to know your daughter, to be a positive presence in her life. And what do I tell Emma? Alexander asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him. How do I explain that her mother used my DNA without permission? That she's the product of what amounts to reproductive fraud? Elizabeth shook her head firmly. You don't. Not now, maybe not ever. Emma is 10 years old. She doesn't need to know the complicated ethical circumstances of her conception. She needs to know that her biological father has discovered her existence and wants to be part of her life. A sanitized version of the truths, Alexander mused. A version appropriate for a child, Elizabeth corrected. The full, complicated adult truth can wait until she's mature enough to process it without being damaged by it. As Elizabeth prepared to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing, Alex. That melody Emma played, the one Claire says she composed independently, what about it? There's a theory in genetics about cellular memory, the idea that memories can be stored at a cellular level and potentially passed down. Most scientists dismiss it as pseudoscience, but what? Elizabeth smiled slightly. Sometimes the things we can't explain scientifically are the most miraculous. Whether through genetics or coincidence or something more mystical, Emma found her way back to you through music. Don't forget that when you're tempted to focus only on Claire's deception. After Elizabeth left, Alexander sat at the room's desk and opened his laptop. He had a week to prepare for meeting his daughter, a girl who shared his DNA but knew nothing of him. What did one say to a child in such circumstances? What could he possibly offer her that would enrich rather than complicate her already full life? He began to type, organizing his thoughts as he would for any complex business challenge. Except this wasn't business. This was fatherhood, unexpected, uninvited, yet suddenly the most important venture of his life. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, bathing Boston in golden afternoon light. Alexander stood in Boston Common, near the edge of the duck pond, dressed casually in khakis and a light blue button-down, an outfit his image consultant had assured him appeared approachable and paternal. He checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. Claire had finally agreed to bring Emma to meet him, under the pretense that he was an old friend interested in supporting her musical education. It wasn't the full truths, but it was a start, a foundation they could build upon gradually. Elizabeth Chen had strongly advised against revealing everything at once, insisting that Emma needed time to form her own relationship with Alexander before learning the complete story of her origins. Alexander spotted them before they saw him, Claire, looking nervous but determined, and beside her Emma, skipping occasionally as they walked along the path toward him. His heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity he hadn't felt since his first major business presentation decades ago. Remember, she knows you as a potential patron who was moved by her performance at the gala, Claire had instructed during their tense phone call the previous evening. Nothing more for now. Alexander had reluctantly agreed, understanding that this incremental approach was best for Emma, regardless of how it frustrated his desire for immediate acknowledgement. Mr. Blackwood, Claire called as they approached, her voice projecting a warmth that didn't reach her eyes. How lovely to see you again. Ms. Lawrence, he responded formally, then shifted his gaze to Emma. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. His eyes precisely, the determined set of her jaw, the analytical way she seemed to be assessing him. "And you must be Emma. Your performance at the gala was extraordinary." Emma tilted her head slightly, studying him with uncanny intensity. "Thank you, sir. Mom says you're a supporter of the arts." "Among other things," Alexander replied, finding himself uncharacteristically nervous under his daughter's scrutiny. "I'm primarily a businessman, but music has always been important to me." "Do you play?" Emma asked directly. Alexander glanced at Claire before answering. "I used to. Piano like you, though nowhere near your level of talent." They walked together along the pond's edge, watching ducks glide across the water's surface while making careful small talk. Alexander learned that Emma loved mathematics in addition to music, that she had recently become fascinated with astronomy, and that she was reading books far beyond her grade level, all traits that mirrored his own childhood interests with uncanny precision. "Would you like to see the swans?" Alexander suggested, pointing toward the far side of the pond, where the iconic swan boats were docked. As they walked, Emma fell naturally into step beside him, leaving Claire trailing slightly behind. In that brief moment of semi-privacy, Emma looked up at him with those familiar blue eyes and asked, "Why did you really want to meet me, Mr. Blackwood?" Startled by her directness, another trait she clearly inherited from him, Alexander chose his words carefully. "Your performance affected me deeply. The piece you played, it reminded me of something very special from my past." "Mom says music can connect people across time and space," Emma observed thoughtfully. "That melodies carry memories and emotions that words can't express." "Your mother is very wise," Alexander replied, ignoring Claire's sharp glance from behind them. They spent the next hour in increasingly comfortable conversation. Alexander was mesmerized by Emma's intelligence, her quick wit, and the mature way she articulated complex ideas about music theory and composition. When she enthusiastically explained how mathematics and music were interconnected, he felt a surge of pride so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. As their meeting drew to a close, Alexander knelt to Emma's eye level. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Emma Lawrence. I'd like to establish a special scholarship fund in your name at the conservatory, one that would provide you with additional opportunities to develop your extraordinary talent." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Why would you do that for me?" Alexander swallowed hard, fighting the urge to tell her everything. "Because talent like yours is rare and should be nurtured. With your mother's permission, of course," he added, glancing at Claire. "That's very generous," Claire said cautiously, "though we'd need to discuss the details privately." "Of course," Alexander agreed, standing. "And perhaps if it's all right with both of you, I could attend your next recital. I'd love to hear more of your original compositions." Emma beamed at him. "I'd like that. I'm working on a new piece that's different, more complex. It's almost like a conversation between two people who have a lot to say to each other but don't know how to begin." Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That sounds fascinating. I look forward to hearing it." As they prepared to part ways, Emma suddenly asked, "Mr. Blackwood, have we met before? You seem familiar somehow." Claire tensed visibly, but Alexander maintained his composure. "Not formally, no. But sometimes people can feel connected through shared experiences or interests, like your music." Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Blackwood." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Emma," he replied sincerely. After mother and daughter had walked away, Alexander remained by the pond, processing the enormity of what had just occurred. He had met his daughter, spoken with her, learned about her passions, witnessed firsthand the brilliant mind she possessed. She was unquestionably his child, not just biologically, but in all the intangible ways that transcended DNA. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from his executive assistant in New York, reporting a crisis at Blackwood Enterprises that apparently required his immediate attention. For the first time in his career, Alexander found himself utterly indifferent to a business emergency. "Handle it," he instructed tersely, before ending the call. That evening, Alexander arrived at Claire's apartment building as requested. She had agreed to meet with him alone to discuss his proposed scholarship, and more importantly, how to proceed with his relationship with Emma. Claire opened the door without speaking and led him to the small kitchen table. 2 cups of tea had been prepared, a peace offering of sorts. "She likes you," Claire said without preamble. "She talked about you all the way home." Alexander felt a surge of satisfaction. "She's remarkable, Claire. Everything about her, her intelligence, her focus, her talent. She's extraordinary." "Yes, she is," Claire agreed softly. "And she's happy, Alex. Her life is stable and fulfilling. Whatever happens next, I need your word that you won't disrupt that stability." "I want to be part of her life," Alexander stated firmly, "not as a patron or a family friend, but as her father. She deserves to know the truth." "Eventually," Claire interrupted. "Not all at once, and not about the circumstances of her conception. That would only hurt and confuse her." Alexander wanted to argue, but remembered Elizabeth Chen's advice. "Fine, but I want regular time with her. I want her to know me before we tell her who I really am." Claire sipped her tea, studying him over the rim of her cup. "And what happens when you return to New York, to your empire and your boardrooms and your billion-dollar deals? Emma isn't a business interest you can manage remotely, Alex." The question hit at Alexander's greatest fear, that he wouldn't know how to be the father Emma deserved. But rather than retreat into defensive anger, he chose honesty. "I'm looking at properties in Boston," he admitted. "I've instructed my COO to assume more day-to-day responsibilities at Blackwood Enterprises. I can run most aspects of the company remotely and commute when necessary." Claire's surprise was evident. "You're moving to Boston, changing your entire life for a child you just met?" "For my daughter," Alexander corrected. "And yes, I am." Claire set down her cup, her expression softening slightly. "You're serious about this?" "More serious than I've been about anything in my life," Alexander confirmed. "Despite how she came to be, Emma is my child. I've missed 10 years. Years I can never get back. I won't miss any more." They talked long into the evening, negotiating boundaries and expectations, finding their way toward an uneasy truce for Emma's sake. By the time they reached an agreement, the first stars were visible through the kitchen window. "Next week," Claire finally conceded, "you can take her to the Science Museum, as a friend of the family for now, but we'll start introducing the idea that you knew me years ago, that we were close once." "Thank you," Alexander said simply. As he prepared to leave, Claire hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. "That melody, Alex, our song. How do you explain Emma composing it independently? She never heard it from me." "Never." Alexander thought about Elizabeth Chen's theories of cellular memory, about the mysterious connections that defied scientific explanation. "Maybe some things are passed down in ways we don't understand," he suggested. "Or maybe it's just another example of how extraordinary our daughter is." "Our daughter." The words hung between them, both a bridge and a reminder of all that had been lost and found. As Alexander walked back to his temporary apartment, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from his real estate agent. A promising property had been located in Cambridge, close to Emma's school and the conservatory. The renovation requirements would be extensive to meet his standards, but it could be ready within 2 months. Alexander confirmed the viewing appointment for the following day, then turned his attention to a more pressing matter. What gift does one bring a 10-year-old musical prodigy on a first father-daughter outing to the Museum of Science? The answer came to him as he passed a small bookshop with an astronomy display in the window. Inside, he found exactly what he was looking for: a beautifully illustrated book on the mathematics of stars and music, the perfect intersection of Emma's two greatest passions. As he paid for his purchase, Alexander Blackwood, feared corporate raider and billionaire CEO, felt something he hadn't experienced in 25 years, the fluttering nervousness of someone standing on the threshold of the most important journey of his life. The Boston Museum of Science buzzed with the excited chatter of school groups and families exploring exhibits on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. Alexander waited anxiously near the entrance, the wrapped astronomy book tucked under his arm. He'd spent the previous week immersing himself in research about age-appropriate conversation topics for 10-year-olds, even going so far as to practice casual dialogue with his executive assistant's daughter via video call, much to the bemusement of his New York staffs. "Mr. Blackwood," Emma's clear voice cut through the crowd as she bounded toward him, Claire following at a more measured pace. "Emma," he greeted her with a smile that came surprisingly naturally. "I'm glad you could make it. My mom says you're taking me to see the planetarium show and the musical acoustics exhibit," Emma said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you know they have a chamber that demonstrates how sound waves travel differently through various materials, and a wall that visualizes sound frequencies as light patterns?" Alexander nodded, charmed by her enthusiasm. "I did read about that. I thought we might explore how your two favorite subjects, music and mathematics, intersect in the physical world." Claire approached, giving Alexander a cautious nod. "I have a lunch meeting with the potential students' parents," she explained to Emma. "Mr. Blackwood will bring you home at 4. You have my number if you need anything," she added, handing Emma a cell phone. "We'll be fine," Alexander assured her, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. This would be his first time alone with his daughter, a thought both exhilarating and terrifying. As Claire departed, Emma looked up at Alexander expectantly. "Mom said you knew her a long time ago." "That's right," Alexander confirmed, carefully navigating the partial truths they had agreed upon. "We were very close once in New York." "Were you in love with her?" Emma asked bluntly. Alexander nearly stumbled, unprepared for such a direct question. Yes, I was," he admitted. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I thought so. You look at her the way Mr. Abernathy looks at Mrs. Abernathy in 4B. They've been married for 50 years, and he still gets all soft-eyed around her." Alexander cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the child's perceptiveness. "I have something for you," he said, changing the subject as he handed her the wrapped package. Emma's face lit up as she carefully unwrapped the gift. "The mathematics of cosmic music, how stars and sound share the same equations," she read, her fingers tracing the embossed silver constellations on the cover. "This looks amazing. Thank you." "I thought it aligned with your interests," Alexander said, warmth spreading through his chest at her genuine delight. They spent the next hour in the acoustics exhibit, where Emma demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of sound wave properties that astonished not only Alexander, but several museum staff members who gathered to listen to her explanations. Her ability to conceptualize complex mathematical relationships reminded Alexander of himself at a young age, though he had channeled that talent into business strategies rather than artistic expression. "You understand these concepts at a remarkable level," Alexander commented as they watched sound waves create intricate patterns on a sand-covered plate. Emma shrugged modestly. "Math makes sense to me. It's like music. There are rules and patterns, but also infinite possibilities within those structures." She glanced at him curiously. "Mom says you built a technology company. You must be good at math, too. I am, Alexander acknowledged, though I use it differently than you do. Ma, how did you build your company? Emma asked, her interest seemingly genuine. Was it hard? Alexander considered how to explain his career to a child. It was challenging, yes. I started with very little, just an idea and determination. There were many obstacles and setbacks, but I persevered. Like Beethoven, Emma observed, he kept composing even when he couldn't hear his own music anymore. That's a good analogy, Alexander agreed, touched by her ability to translate his experience into terms meaningful to her. Sometimes, the most worthwhile accomplishments require overcoming significant difficulties. They made their way to the planetarium for the afternoon show on cosmic harmonies, an exploration of how mathematical ratios found in music also appear throughout the universe. As they settled into their seats and the dome darkened, Emma whispered, "Sometimes when I compose, I feel like I'm discovering something that already exists, not creating something new. Like the music is already out there in the universe, and I'm just the first person to hear it. Is that weird?" Alexander thought of their song, the melody that had inexplicably found its way into his daughter's compositions, despite the impossibility of her ever having heard it. "Not weird at all," he answered softly. "Some of the greatest scientific and mathematical discoveries felt that way to their discoverers too, like they were uncovering something that had always existed, waiting to be found." Emma smiled at him in the darkness, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them before the show began. As stars and galaxies filled the dome above them, mathematical equations flowing between celestial bodies to demonstrate the underlying order of the cosmos, Alexander felt an overwhelming sense of connection, not just to Emma, but to something larger than himself, something that transcended his own limited understanding. After the planetarium show, they visited the museum cafe for ice cream. Emma chose chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, while Alexander opted for vanilla, a contrast that made her giggle. "That's so boring," she teased. "Don't you want to try something more adventurous?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "I find that I appreciate simplicity and quality in some areas, which frees me to take calculated risks in others." "That sounds like something from a fortune cookie," Emma replied, making him laugh unexpectedly. As they ate their ice cream, Emma grew more serious. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Blackwood?" "Alexander, please," he corrected gently. "And yes, you can ask me anything. Why are you really spending time with me?" Her blue eyes, his eyes, studied him intently. "Most of Mom's friends aren't interested in hanging out with kids, especially not at science museums." Alexander had prepared for this question, but now found his carefully rehearsed answer inadequate. "The truth is, Emma, I've reached a point in my life where I'm re-evaluating what matters most. I've achieved professional success beyond what I ever imagined, but I've neglected other aspects of life: connection, family, mentorship. When I heard you play, I recognized something special, not just talent, but a kindred spirit of sorts." Emma considered this, licking ice cream from her spoon. "So I'm like a project for your personal growth?" There was no accusation in her tone, merely analytical curiosity. Alexander winced internally at how accurately she'd cut to the heart of his prepared explanation. "No," he said firmly. "You're not a project. You're an extraordinary young person who I believe I can learn from as much as I might have anything to teach." This seemed to satisfy her. "Okay, but you should try chocolate ice cream next time. Taking no risks at all is its own kind of risk." "Noted," Alexander replied, charmed by her wisdom. As their museum visit drew to a close, they found themselves in the gift shop. Emma gravitated toward a display of crystal growing kits, examining them with intense focus. "Would you like one?" Alexander offered. Emma hesitated. "Mom says I need to be careful about accepting expensive gifts." "A wise policy," Alexander acknowledged. "But this is educational. Perhaps we could use it as a project next time we meet. If you'd like to meet again, that is." "I would," Emma replied without hesitation. "You're easier to talk to than most adults. You don't pretend to know things when you don't. And you don't treat me like I'm stupid when I ask questions." Alexander felt an unexpected lump in his throat. "That's because you're not stupid. Far from it." On the drive back to Claire's apartment, Emma asked about his life in New York, his childhood, whether he had other family. Alexander answered as honestly as possible, without revealing anything that contradicted their agreed-upon narrative. "No, I don't have children," he replied when she asked directly. "That's something I regret now as I get older." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why you wanted to meet me, because you don't have kids of your own." Alexander gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Perhaps that's part of it," he managed. When they arrived at Claire's building, Emma surprised him by asking, "Would you like to hear what I'm working on? My new composition. Mom won't be home for another half hour." "I'd be honored," Alexander replied sincerely. In the apartment, Emma sat at the upright piano with the poise of a much older performer. "It's still in progress," she warned. "I've been calling it resonance because it's about how people can vibrate at the same frequency even when they're apart." The piece began softly, with a questioning melody in the right hand, echoed by a supportive bass line. As it developed, Alexander recognized elements of their song, interwoven with new themes, fragments of the original melody appearing like memories before transforming into something more complex, more mature. The composition told a story of separation, searching, and eventual recognition, a musical narrative that so perfectly mirrored their own situation that Alexander felt tears threatening again. When Emma finished playing, she looked at him expectantly. "What do you think?" "It's brilliant," Alexander said honestly. "One of the most emotionally resonant pieces I've ever heard. You have a remarkable gift for translating human experience into music." Emma beamed at the praise. "I've been dreaming about this melody for years, but I could never figure out how to develop it properly. Then, after I met you, it started coming together." The statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither could fully articulate. Before Alexander could respond, they heard Claire's key in the lock. "It seems our time is up," he said regretfully. "Will you come hear me play at the conservatory recital next week?" Emma asked eagerly. "I'm performing this piece for the first time." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Alexander promised. As he prepared to leave, he exchanged a meaningful glance with Claire, who had been watching their interaction with an unreadable expression. "Thank you for today," Emma said, surprising him with a quick, impulsive hug before retreating to her room with her new book and crystal growing kit. Once she was out of earshot, Claire spoke softly. "She likes you. A lot." "The feeling is mutual," Alexander replied. "I've never seen her connect with anyone so quickly," Claire admitted. "It's as if she recognizes something in you without knowing why." "Maybe she does," Alexander suggested. "On some level beyond conscious understanding." Claire's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Emma deserving to know the truth. And you're right. But we need to do it carefully, thoughtfully." Alexander nodded, relief washing over him. "How do we proceed?" "The recital is next Friday," Claire said. "Come hear her play. Afterward, we'll both talk to her. Begin the process of helping her understand who you really are." As Alexander drove back to his temporary apartment, he felt a mixture of anticipation and terror at the prospect of Emma learning he was her father. Would she feel betrayed by the deception, even this brief one? Would she resent him for his absence in her life, involuntary though it had been? Or would she embrace him as she had today, with that same remarkable openness and acceptance? His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Opening it, he found a photo of the crystal growing kit with the message, "Mom says I can start this on Saturday. She said you could come help if you want." This is Emma, by the way. Mum, let me text you." Alexander smiled, texting back immediately. "I'll be there. Save the blue crystals for me." The response came seconds later. "Blue is my favorite, but I'll share. Maybe." For the first time in 25 years, Alexander Blackwood laughed with pure, unrestrained joy. The New England Conservatory's recital hall buzzed with quiet anticipation as family members and music aficionados filled the rows of burgundy velvet seats. Alexander sat in the third row, close enough to see every expression on Emma's face when she performed, but not so close as to make her nervous. He fidgeted with his program, scanning the names of the young performers until he found Emma's, listed second to last, a position of honor indicating the faculty's high regard for her abilities. The past week had transformed Alexander's life more profoundly than the acquisition of his first $1 billion. He had finalized the purchase of a brownstone townhouse, just 6 blocks from Claire's apartment, a property he was renovating to include a state-of-the-art music room with perfect acoustics for Emma's practice. He had reorganized Blackwood Enterprises' leadership structure to allow him to work primarily from Boston, and he had spent 3 afternoons with Emma, helping her grow crystals, discussing her favorite books, and once, at her insistence, attempting to learn the rudimentary basics of piano again after 25 years. "Your fingers remember more than you think," Emma had assured him when he stumbled through a simple scale. "Music stays in your muscles, even when your mind forgets." Now, as the lights dimmed and the recital began, Alexander felt an unfamiliar nervousness. Tonight, after Emma's performance, they would begin the delicate process of telling her who he really was. Claire had suggested they start with simplified facts. That Alexander and Claire had loved each other many years ago, that circumstances had separated them before they knew Emma would be born, and that Alexander had only recently discovered he had a daughter. The specific details of Emma's conception would remain private for now, perhaps forever. Some truths, Claire and Alexander had agreed, served no purpose other than to burden a child with adult complexities she shouldn't have to navigate. Alexander barely registered the performances of the other children, his mind rehearsing what he would say when the moment finally came. When the second-to-last performer was announced, he sat forward, every sense suddenly heightened. Emma walked onto the stage in a simple blue dress, her chestnut hair pulled back with a silver barrette Alexander had sent as a good luck gift that morning. She approached the grand piano with the same quiet confidence he had seen at the gala, adjusted the bench, and looked out into the audience. Her eyes found his immediately, as if drawn by some invisible force, and she smiled, a small, private gesture meant just for him. Emma Lawrence would be performing an original composition entitled Resonance, the announcer stated. Ms. Lawrence describes her piece as an exploration of connections that transcend time and distance. A hush fell over the hall as Emma placed her hands above the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece had evolved since Alexander had heard it in Claire's apartment. The questioning theme remained, but Emma had developed it further, creating a musical dialogue between the searching melody and an answering counterpoint that gradually moved from distance to harmony. The emotional resonance of the composition was extraordinary, even more so because Alexander understood its unconscious significance. It was the story of their connection, translated into the universal language of music by a child who didn't yet know the true meaning of what she was expressing. As the piece reached its climax, elements of their original song emerged more clearly, no longer fragments, but fully integrated into the new composition, past and present, merging into something that looked toward the future. Alexander felt tears tracking silently down his cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. Across the hall, he could see Claire similarly affected, her hand pressed against her heart. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted into applause. Emma stood and curtsied, her eyes finding Alexander's again as her face broke into a radiant smile. The applause continued far longer than it had for any other performer, eventually culminating in a standing ovation led by Alexander himself. Afterward, in the reception area where proud parents congratulated their children, Alexander and Claire stood slightly apart, waiting for Emma to finish receiving praise from her instructors. When she finally made her way to them, her face was flushed with triumph. "You were magnificent," Alexander told her, not bothering to disguise the emotion in his voice. "Truly exceptional, sweetheart," Claire agreed, embracing her daughter. "Everyone was moved by your composition." Emma beamed. "Did you hear how I developed the main theme? I figured out how to make the two voices finally find each other in the middle section." "I did hear that," Alexander said softly. "It was perfect." Claire glanced at him meaningfully, then looked down at Emma. "Honey, Alexander and I were hoping we could take you out for a special dinner to celebrate. There's something important we'd like to talk to you about." Emma looked between them curiously. "Something good or something bad?" "Something significant," Alexander answered carefully, "but nothing for you to worry about." They chose a quiet restaurant where they could speak privately, a small Italian place with secluded booths and soft lighting. Throughout the appetizer course, Emma regaled them with detailed analysis of the other performances and her instructor's feedback on her composition. Alexander listened attentively, marveling at her passionate enthusiasm and articulate observations. As their main courses arrived, Claire gently steered the conversation in a new direction. "Emma, remember how we've talked about your biological father being an anonymous donor?" Emma nodded, suddenly alert to the shift in topic. "Yes, you said he helped give you the greatest gift in the world, me, but that he wasn't going to be part of our family." She glanced curiously at Alexander, then back to her mother. "Why are we talking about this now?" Claire took a deep breath. "Because what I told you wasn't entirely accurate, and it's time you knew more of the truths." Emma set down her fork, her expression growing serious. "What do you mean?" Alexander's heart pounded as Claire continued. "Many years ago, before you were born, Alexander and I loved each other very much. We were together in New York, planning a future." Emma's gaze shifted to Alexander, her remarkable mind clearly working to process this new information. "You're not just Mom's old friend, are you?" she asked directly. "No," Alexander admitted, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not." "Emma," Claire continued, reaching for her daughter's hand, "circumstances separated us before we knew you would be coming into the world. Alexander didn't know about you until very recently, until he heard you play at the gala." Emma stared at Alexander, her expression unreadable. "Are you saying he's my father? My biological father?" The moment crystallized around them, the ambient noise of the restaurant fading away as these three people stood at the threshold of an irrevocable change. "Yes," Alexander confirmed, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am your biological father, Emma." Emma sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Alexander's face. No tears, no outburst, just intense, analytical focus as she processed this revelation. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "That's why you recognize my music," she said, not a question but a statement of understanding. "That's why we like the same things, why we think the same way." "Yes," Alexander said again, "though I didn't know until I heard you play our song, a piece your mother and I shared years ago, that somehow you composed independently." Emma turned to Claire, her voice remarkably composed for a 10-year-old receiving life-altering news. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you say he was an anonymous donor?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "It's complicated, sweetheart. When I decided to have you, Alexander and I had been apart for many years. I made choices that weren't entirely fair to either of you, but I thought I was doing what was best." "So you lied," Emma stated flatly. "I did," Claire admitted, "and I'm sorry, but I want to make it right now." Emma turned back to Alexander. "Did you not want me? Is that why you weren't around?" "No, Emma," Alexander said firmly, leaning forward to meet her gaze directly. "I didn't know about you. If I had known, nothing would have kept me from being part of your life. Nothing." Emma considered this, her extraordinary mind visibly working through the implications. "So, when you heard me play at the gala, you realized I might be your daughter?" "I felt a connection I couldn't explain," Alexander replied honestly. "The melody you played was something only your mother and I knew. It seemed impossible that you could know it too, unless we were connected somehow," Emma finished thoughtfully. She was silent for another long moment before asking, "What happens now?" It was the question Alexander had been both anticipating and dreading. "That depends largely on what you want, Emma. I've moved to Boston to be near you. I want to be part of your life, as much or as little as you're comfortable with. But I won't force anything. This is your decision too." Emma looked between them, her young face showing wisdom beyond her years. "I need to think about this. It's a lot to process." "Of course," Claire agreed quickly. "Take all the time you need." "There's just one thing I want to know right now," Emma said, fixing Alexander with an intense gaze. "The song, our song as you called it, how is it possible that I composed it without ever hearing it?" Alexander exchanged a glance with Claire before answering carefully. "I don't know for certain. Some scientists believe in something called genetic memory. The idea that certain memories or knowledge might be passed down in ways we don't fully understand. Others would call it a remarkable coincidence." "And what do you believe?" Emma pressed. Alexander considered the question seriously. "I believe that the connections between people, especially between parents and children, are more profound and mysterious than science can yet explain. I believe that somehow, across time and distance, something of my love for your mother, embodied in that melody, found its way to you." Emma nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "I'd like to go home now, please. I need some time." The drive back to Claire's apartment was quiet, Emma lost in thought in the back seat. When they arrived, she surprised both adults by giving Alexander a brief but deliberate hug before disappearing into her bedroom. "That went better than I feared," Claire said softly, once Emma was out of earshot. "But she's going to have more questions, difficult ones. And we'll answer them as honestly as we can," Alexander replied. "She deserves that much. She needs time to adjust to the idea that her father isn't some anonymous figure, but a real person who wants to be in her life," Claire warned. "Don't push too hard, too fast." "I won't," Alexander promised. "But I'm not going anywhere, Claire, no matter how long it takes." As Alexander drove back to his temporary apartment, his phone chimed with a text message. It was from Emma. "I'm still processing everything, but I'm glad you're my father. The universe makes more sense that way." Alexander pulled over to the side of the road, overcome with emotion. After composing himself, he typed a simple reply. "I'm glad too, more than I can express. Take all the time you need. I'll be here." In his apartment, Alexander moved to the window overlooking Boston Harbor, where lights from the city sparkled on the dark water. For 25 years, he had pursued wealth and power, building an empire that had brought him everything except what he now realized mattered most. Tonight, a text message from a 10-year-old girl had given him something his billions never could, the chance to be a father. As he stood watching the harbor lights, Alexander began to hum softly. Their song, the melody that had bridged impossible distances to reunite him with a daughter he hadn't known existed. For the first time in decades, Alexander Blackwood felt complete. 2 years later, Alexander stood in the doorway of the music room in his Cambridge brownstone, watching Emma at the grand piano he had installed for her 13th birthday. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating her chestnut hair, now styled in a fashionable bob, as her fingers moved confidently across the keys. She was working on a new composition, pausing occasionally to make notations on the staff paper beside her. The past 24 months had transformed all their lives in ways none of them could have predicted. After the initial revelation, Emma had taken her time adapting to the reality of having a father after 10 years without one. She had asked difficult questions, experienced moments of confusion, and even anger as she processed the complex circumstances of her origins. But gradually their relationship had blossomed into something profound and genuine. Alexander had kept his promise to remain in Boston, dividing his time between the two cities, but prioritizing his role as Emma's father above all else. He had attended every recital, every school event, and had discovered a previously untapped well of patience within himself as he learned the intricacies of parenting a gifted preteen. Claire, too, had grown and changed. The grudging truce between her and Alexander had evolved into a respectful co-parenting relationship, and eventually, something approaching friendship. The three of them had found a rhythm that worked. Emma spending weekdays at Claire's apartment and weekends at Alexander's townhouse, with flexibility for special occasions and Emma's increasingly busy performance schedule. "That sounds beautiful," Alexander commented as Emma concluded a particularly moving passage. "New composition?" Emma smiled up at him. "It's for the Juilliard Summer Program application. Mom thought I should compose something original rather than just performing standard repertoire." "Your mother is very wise," Alexander agreed, entering the room fully. "Though I have no doubt you'd be accepted regardless." Emma rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "You're biased." "Proudly so," Alexander admitted with a smile. At 12, almost 13, Emma had inherited the best of both her parents, Claire's artistic sensibility and Alexander's analytical mind, combined with a confidence that was entirely her own. Her musical career was flourishing. She had performed at Carnegie Hall 6 months earlier as part of a showcase of young composers, an experience that had cemented her determination to pursue music professionally. "The foundation board approved your proposal, by the way," Alexander mentioned, taking a seat in the armchair near the piano. "The scholarship program for young composers will launch next fall. The committee particularly liked your suggestion to include mentorship opportunities alongside financial support." Emma beamed. The Children's Musical Advancement Foundation, the same organization that had brought them together at the fateful gala, was now partly guided by Alexander's philanthropy, with Emma serving as its youngest ever advisory board member. "That's fantastic. Did they approve the name?" Alexander nodded. "The Claire Lawrence Fellowship for Young Composers. Your mother was quite moved when I told her." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Claire herself, letting herself in with the key she had for emergencies and scheduled visits. "Sorry I'm early," she called, entering the music room. "My afternoon student canceled." She looked between them with a smile. "Working on the Juilliard piece." "Making progress," Emma confirmed. "Dad was just telling me about the fellowship." The word "dad" still sent a warm current through Alexander's chest every time Emma used it. She had begun calling him that about 6 months after their revelation dinner, starting tentatively, but growing more comfortable with the term as their relationship deepened. "I still think it should be named after both of you," Claire said, setting down her bag. "You're funding it after all." "The Blackwood name is on enough buildings and programs," Alexander replied. "This one should honor the woman who devoted her life to music education." With the easy camaraderie between Alexander and Claire had been hard-won. There had been difficult conversations, painful reckonings with past choices, and professional therapy sessions to navigate the complex dynamics of their situation. But for Emma's sake, and eventually for their own, they had forged a relationship based on mutual respect and their shared love for their daughter. I finished processing the Foundation's annual reports this morning, Alexander continued. The music outreach programs in underserved communities are showing remarkable results. Participation is up 40% from last year. Alexander's professional life had undergone significant changes as well. While he remained CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, he had restructured the company to allow more time for philanthropic work. The Blackwood Foundation now focused primarily on arts education and accessibility, with Emma's input shaping many of its initiatives. "Are we still having dinner with the Chens tonight?" Emma asked, organizing her sheet music. 7 o'clock, Alexander confirmed. "James and Elizabeth are eager to hear about your Carnegie Hall experience." The Chens had remained important figures in their lives, their role in bringing the family together now openly acknowledged and appreciated. Elizabeth, in particular, had become a trusted advisor to Emma as she navigated the complexities of her unusual family story. "Before dinner, though," Claire interjected, "we need to discuss summer plans. If Emma gets into the Juilliard program, that's 6 weeks in New York. We need to figure out logistics." "I've been thinking about that," Alexander said. "My penthouse has plenty of room for both of you, if you're comfortable with that arrangement, Claire. Or I can arrange separate accommodations nearby." "Let's see if I get in first," Emma suggested practically. "Then we can figure out the details." Later that evening, after a pleasant dinner with the Chens, Alexander and Emma returned to the brownstone. As was their Friday night tradition, they settled into the living room with hot chocolate to share thoughts about their week. "There's something I've been wanting to show you," Emma said suddenly, setting down her mug. "I've been working on it for a while, but it wasn't ready until now." She disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a leather-bound portfolio. "Remember how you told me about cellular memory? How some scientists believe memories can be passed down genetically?" Alexander nodded, curious. "Well, I've been researching it," Emma continued, opening the portfolio to reveal newspaper clippings, scientific journal articles, and her own handwritten notes. "And I've been experimenting with our song, the one that connected us." She showed him a series of musical compositions, each building on the original melody they shared. "I've been deconstructing it, analyzing its mathematical properties, and creating variations that explore different emotional states. It's like a musical family tree." Alexander was touched by the depth of thought Emma had put into this project. "This is extraordinary, Emma. Here's the most interesting part," she said, flipping to a page where she had transcribed their original melody alongside a piece of classical music. "I found this Schubert fragment that contains a phrase remarkably similar to our song, and this folk melody from Eastern Europe has comparable intervallic relationships." "What are you suggesting?" Alexander asked, fascinated. "Maybe our song wasn't just ours," Emma explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "Maybe it's part of something larger, a musical idea that has been evolving through generations, finding different expressions in different times and places, and somehow it found both of you and then me." Alexander considered this possibility, moved by his daughter's perception and creativity. "A melody that transcends individual lives, connecting people across time." "Exactly," Emma agreed enthusiastically. "Which means our connection isn't just genetic or biological. It's part of something bigger, something we don't fully understand but can explore through music." As Emma continued sharing her research and theories, Alexander was struck by how far they had come in 2 years. From strangers connected by an inexplicable musical coincidence to father and daughter exploring the mysteries of their bond together. The pain of his 25-year separation from Claire, the shock of discovering Emma's existence, the ethical complications of her conception, all had been transformed into something healing and profound. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Alexander stood on the small balcony of his study, gazing at the Cambridge skyline. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Emma called to say goodnight. She can't stop talking about showing you her research project. Thank you for encouraging her curiosity. We've come a long way, haven't we? Alexander smiled as he typed his reply. Further than I ever imagined possible. She's the best of both of us. He returned to his desk where a framed photograph now held pride of place. Emma at Carnegie Hall, flanked by both her parents, all three faces alight with joy. Beside it sat a small music box, a gift from Emma on their first Father's Day together, that played their song when opened. Alexander turned the tiny brass key and let the familiar melody fill the quiet room. The notes that had once brought him to tears in a crowded ballroom now evoked a different emotion: gratitude. Gratitude for second chances, for mysteries that defied explanation, and for the remarkable daughter who had brought music back into his life. As the last notes faded, Alexander closed the music box gently. Tomorrow held new possibilities. Emma's Juilliard audition to prepare for, foundation initiatives to develop, the everyday magic of watching his daughter grow. The fortune he had spent decades building now seemed merely a footnote to his true legacy. A family found against impossible odds, connected by melodies that transcended time and circumstance. My name is Theo Teller, and I want to thank you for joining me on this extraordinary journey of rediscovery and connection. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Your comments about what resonated with you most would mean the world to us, and we'd love to hear your suggestions for future stories. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder that it's never too late for new beginnings, that some bonds transcend time and distance, and that the most meaningful connections often come when we least expect them. Until next time, may your own life be filled with music that speaks to your soul.